Hello there. Welcome to Work Tips Pro. This is where we help professionals like you stand out among their peers. My name is Mukhtar, and today we're going to be having an interview. We have a special guest, and that special guest is Markus. Just quickly, Markus is the founder of Authentic Business Communication, a coaching company that specializes in workplace communication and relationship building. Mm-hmm. He has years of experience coaching, facilitating workshops, and developing content on communication and relationship building. His specialties include workplace communication, in a culturally diverse environment, interview skills for career transitioning, advanced presentation skills and public speaking, building relationship capital with internal and external clients. And the list goes on. Now, I personally met Markus about 4 years ago. I attended one of his classes, and I would say that his class was probably one of the best communication classes that I've attended. And I'm actually saying this truthfully. I still use the lessons that I've learned from Markus till today. An example, for those of you that watch this channel regularly, if you remember, there's a video that I did on the Tell Me About Yourself interview question, right? So if you remember at the beginning of that video, well, if you haven't seen that video, please go see that video. But if you have seen that video, if you remember at the beginning of that video, I said I learned a technique from one of my teachers. Well, that teacher is Markus. And I'm really excited to have Markus on the interview. And I'm a bit nervous because I feel like I'm in the presence of a giant. Right. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Markus, welcome to the interview.
Thank you so much, Mukhtar. You know, just before I jump in, I've watched your Tell Me About Yourself video.
Okay.
And for anyone who's watching, Mukhtar is nailing it there. The fundamentals that matter actually come across really well. And I love the way that you present it with absolutely no fluff, right? Yeah. Just get to the point. There's a function that we need to serve here. So absolutely well done. But it's a pleasure to meet with you. I think we said after about 4 years, right?
Yes.
And certainly your career has taken shape tremendously too. So it's my joy to be here.
No, thank you very much. Appreciate the feedback. And yeah, I mean, I really mean that. Like a lot of, the notes that I took in your class, I'm still using them till today. And I think that's a testament to you as a teacher and to your skills as your communication skills that you not only teach, but live by. So let's jump right in, Markus. Let's start with your story.
Okay.
How did you develop your own communication skills? Like, how did you get to the level that you are at?
It's not a huge question, but the implications of answering it is pretty huge. And I'll sort of take you through stages. You know, I have the expression that in terms of innate skills, you stand in front of the line in some cases, and in some cases you stand in the back of the line. Like when they handed out math skills at birth, I stood in the back of the line. But when they handed out verbal skills, evidently I was somewhere near the front. So I've always had a proclivity for language and a love and interest of it, in it and of it. But thus I chose a career path that required communication at its core. And my early career was in pharmaceuticals. And without realizing it then, in pharmaceutical sales, you're constantly communicating under pressure to people that occupy a higher social rank than you. Right? So there's pressure implied, etc. Doctors and specialists and so on. And not often that very tolerant either. Yeah. So you've got to get your meaning across crisply under pressure. then I entered the training environment in pharmaceuticals, where I taught people some of these tips and tricks. And some of these tips and tricks revolved around the whole idea of, if you can give the person that you're communicating with, if you can give them a framework of what you're going to be saying, they visibly relax. And so hence you would remember that I spoke in some of the sessions you attended about framing what you want to say before you actually say the content, right?
Yes.
So, but Mukhtar, I think those stages were somewhat unconscious. I sort of intuitively went there. Then I attended a presentation workshop in the US. I think it was in Delaware, with a guy that I still remember to this day, Jim Smith. He was a big ex-football player. This big guy with presence up, up to the ceiling. And he told me how to tell a story compellingly. And he drilled us. You had to tell the most boring stories, but in a compelling fashion, right? He would pick deliberately boring topics, but you had to juice it up.
I see. And
so he taught me technique. And then following that, feedback from some really good managers that taught me or told me, Marcus, what we think is you need to focus on is critical thinking, because you have a proclivity for over talking stuff because you're verbally strong. So you got to pull back a little bit, buddy. Pull back a little bit, because your strength in language is actually counting against you because you over talk, as I'm probably doing now. But the point is that that it taught me critical thinking in terms of what I want to share and how I want to share it. And I discovered that we all know what we want to say, but under pressure, it is a matter of how we want to unpack that really matters, and that gets us stuck. So I think for now, that is probably sufficient to your question.
No, a lot of things that you said really stuck out for me. First of all, the fact that there's this anxiety that results from communicating with people that are at the higher social, that occupy a higher social rank, so to speak, right? So there's that natural anxiety that manifests in different ways, and then you're not as coherent when you speak. So we'll probably get to that. We might get to that later on in the interview. But another thing that stuck out, for me, I guess, if I were to summarize what you just mentioned, you learned how to use frameworks, right, to really be concise, right? And that's that's what I try to pass across with my Tell Me About Yourself video, like just using frameworks, and that just helps you to be concise. It helps the person listening to you to easily digest your message, right? By just using those, like, they're kind of like signposts along the ways. Now, in the corporate world, I am a technical person. Maybe I deal with, I develop software, and I want to give a presentation. What's your advice? Because a lot of people advise use stories, and stories have their benefits, but some people can feel awkward telling stories in a corporate setting. What would your advice be to that person that wants to give a presentation and maybe wants to use storytelling?
Very important, yes. I think the more technical people are, the more they feel that my technical information that I'm going to share ought to be so compelling that I don't need to spruce it up. And they typically tell me, I don't need to pretty it up because it is already inherently valuable. And maybe that is demonstrably true. The point is that my best coach was my last manager that I had in pharma. And he said to me, we would get a training module ready, and I was then going to train it, and I'd do a dry run with him. And then he said to me, okay, so you look like you're ready, Marcus. Are you excited? And then I'd say, yeah, I'm very excited. And then he would say, remember, you are the most excited guy in that room. The others would rather be golfing. Okay.
Yeah.
And that is such a slap in the face, right?
Yeah.
What is the point here? Is that if you can't story the information in the language of the other person, you're already half missing them. So my recommendation is that if you can use micro stories in your presentation about, say, a technical tool that you're delivering or suggesting, how about go about a story about it like this? You say, folks, today I want to be talking to you about tool XYZ that we're going to be implementing. But before I get there, let me give you a little bit of context. You know, just 2 weeks ago, I spoke to Bob in the supply chain department. And Bob said to me that, Markus, the technology works well. The tool is well proven. I understand its value. But my goodness, does it feel like I'm overworking myself every single time I use that tool? If I could only half the amount of hours that I put into administrating this tool, I'd be a happy camper. Okay, so back to the presentation, folks. The point of the interview this morning, the point of the presentation this morning is to show you how I'm going to save Bob at least 50% of the time spent. Isn't that way more relatable?
Yeah.
Than walking into a presentation and say, today I'm going to show you how product or tool XYZ works, and then plowing into the detail.
Yeah.
Because now every person sees the Bob in themselves, right? And so the people who least suspect that they need to be storytellers very often ought to be the best ones, because their content is particularly dry for their audience. I hope that speaks to your question.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And I like the point, the last point you made where you said that the people that think that they don't need to be storytellers actually need to especially consider being even better storytellers, so to speak.
And I just want to add to that, Mukhtar, that your story doesn't need to be a fairy tale. I mean, it doesn't have to be the presentation. That I think that is where people lose hope, because they think, oh my goodness, now I've got to transform this entire 15-minute presentation into a story. Not true. You can learn how to tell a story quickly at high level, 2 minutes. But it holds, it sort of cushions everything that's coming.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I like the term that you used before. I think you said micro stories. I think that's what you
micro stories.
Micro stories. So it's just like sort of sprinkling that across, throughout your presentation. It just because it takes a lot these days to keep people engaged, right? And just doing that, sprinkling that, asking questions. There are all these techniques that you can use to really hold people's attention. So did you
maybe if I can, if you don't mind, I'll tell you quickly the elements of a micro story.
Sure.
Who was involved and what were they struggling with? Or, what did they tell me they're struggling with? Number two, what were the implications of their struggle? Number three, that what I'm going to tell you will address that struggle. And then number four, let's show you, right? So who is involved? What were they struggling? What's the implication of the struggle? How will what I'm going to show you address the struggle? And then let's launch into the explanation. Done. High level, super high level.
Before I move on to my next point, you mentioned critical thinking. How has that really helped you?
Why it is important to be a critical thinker in communication is because the way that you communicate is a very strong signal of the way that you work.
Okay.
So credibility for me and critical thinking go hand in hand. Because if you speak with me, Mukhtar, and I discovered that you're a very orderly speaker, the implication, without me analyzing it consciously, the implication for me almost emotionally is that, wow, this guy is so clear. I bet that when he works, he is precisely as orderly. So critical thinking and the display of it verbally translates into the assumption that you're reliable, that you're competent, that you're certain, that you're confident, that you're experienced, you know, and so you're broadcasting your overall approach to life as a professional. And I think that is the value of it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And also what I find is that for people that exhibit that skill quite well, when you display critical thinking in a way you think, it's very easy to accept what you're saying. Like there's something in us, like just when something is logical, it's just easy to digest, right? I don't know what it is, but we recognize as human beings, we recognize, you know, logic, right? It's just easy to just take in, as opposed to, you know, something that's not logical, you know? So if you always exhibit that, if you always display that, yes, that enhances your credibility. And on top of that, if you're able to communicate that very well, then I feel like that's a very strong combination.
I always, we sometimes in some of my workshops, when I do corporate workshops, we give people ludicrous topics to do a presentation on, and very often topics that they don't have a lot of knowledge about. We give them no time to research the subject matter, just talk for 2 minutes. And you'd be amazed, the folks who are most structured in how they communicate their random thoughts about this topic, even if the thoughts are not factually correct, but the more structured the thoughts are, the more compelling and convincing it becomes.
Interesting.
So that is a bit of a game that we play with people just to put them under pressure. But the point is made that structure will win every single time. If person A and person B communicates the same basic content, but person B is more structured than person A, who just rambles, person B will come across as compelling and trustworthy. It's unbelievable. Politicians do this all the time, Mukhtar.
Can you
some sorry.
Some politicians. So just for the sake of, you know, our audience, can we get to some concrete examples of what that means when you're speaking? So how do you put in structure into, you know, a verbal exchange?
Yeah, great. This is something that I learned way back in my pharmaceutical career. You've got to give somebody a preview of where you're going to go, because you know that they are in a hurry. They want you to, they hope that you're going to stop at some point, right? That there's a limit to how much you're going to talk to them. So you want to calm them down. And I call that a framing statement. And when I used to do a high pressure call with my clients, I would frame by telling them, I can see that you're extremely busy, and I see that there are 3 patients waiting in the waiting room. I have 2 things that I want to share with you briefly, and it's going to take me no longer than 5 minutes. Is that okay? Nice. I'm not kidding you. You visibly see the person relaxing and they stop doing this, right? Because people are mentally clock watching.
Yeah.
So step number 1, frame before you go. Give me a preview of what's going to occur between you and me here. I have 4 techniques that I advocate. There are actually more, but these four work almost everywhere. You can break the body of your argument into two pieces, and I call that a seesaw. So practically, Mukhtar, it might say, it might sound like this. Somebody says to me, I noticed that you got a new phone. How do you like it? I could say, it's okay, but that's not really compelling, right? Mm-hmm. So I could say, well, you know, what I love about this phone is battery life is tremendous. And I also like the size of the screen. That's basically why I bought it in the first place. Having said that, the camera is not the best. And it's also an old model, so I'll probably have to replace it soon, right? So I unpacked my thoughts about this phone densely into a positive versus negative, for argument's sake. You can do that obviously with any material. What do you like about your job? Well, I like the fact that it pushes my potential. Also like the people that I work with. On the other hand, I'm working in an organization where the promotional possibilities are limited and I might have to look for another opportunity, right? So that's technique number one, a seesaw. Mm-hmm. Two would be breaking things into three. If you've got an inordinate amount of information to share, like tell me about yourself, that's a great example of three, right? Yeah. Because if I really tell you about myself, I can talk for an hour, but you would also be snoring by the time I'm done. Yeah. So how about I compact it into three core areas, like here is my skill set and whatever pertains to skill set. Here is my experience and whatever is relevant and pertains to that. And here is why I felt that it is crucial that I apply for this job because I think there's a good fit, right? 1, 2, 3. Now I tell the person up front, let me talk to you about myself in three main areas: my skill set, my experience, and why I applied, and off you go, right? So that's threes. The third technique is if you ever have to explain any process, any linear process, just remember that it works in milestones or the way dominoes fall. You know, so step 1, then step 2, then step 3, then step 4. Tick, 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 tick. Dominoes. So practically, how do you bake an egg omelet? Well, first of all, step 1, wash your hands, for crying out loud. Number 2, get a good non-stick pan. Number 3, heat it to moderate heat and put some oil in. Number 4, crack a few eggs, scramble them. Number 5, in the pan, wait until they set a little bit. Number 6, add your topping. Number 7, fold and serve. Right, so I walked you really briefly through 7 steps of making an omelet. And the fourth technique would be to provide you with a stand back, zoom out view of a situation before I get into detail. A big favorite of mine, because very often your audience requires context before you get into the boring content. Very often people really value the big picture, like Bob, who was having a conversation with me and he was complaining about the fact that this tool wastes so much of his money, of his time. And it frustrates him and he wishes that it could be better. That's big picture. It's Bob's story. Now, let me show you in detail how this tool is going to save you money through step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, right? So zoom out, stand back, then get into the detail.
Nice.
I hope that answers it.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, this is very helpful. Yeah, because I'm very big on practical advice that people can take away and start implementing. Yeah, this was just more than I asked for. So thanks for that.
Sure.
How would you recommend that you handle difficult conversations at work? Do you have maybe a framework? Do you have a formula? Or,
Yeah.
so I guess we can start with that and then we can delve into more specifics.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's me or you going to speak to somebody else because we've got something that weighs heavily on us and we need to go and address it. Step number one, you need to know how you're going to open that conversation. And it's not just in any way, Mukhtar. I want to tell the person in the opener, number one, I want to give what I want to talk about a credible name. So I might say to you, Mukhtar, I need to chat with you about something that I feel a little bit awkward about discussing, right? I named it awkward. I want to talk to you about something that I feel a little bit awkward about discussing, but I think it is valuable for both of us, valuable enough that I'm going to do it anyway. Right. So you need to frame why you are there. And if you can tell them you don't expect that this is more than a 15-minute discussion. So sort of why am I here and the time I anticipate it will take. Number two, tell them that this will not just be me talking at you or leveling complaints at you, but I'm here because I want to hear your perspective, because I'm sure I have blind spots. And number three, you want to tell them, I'm hoping that we will collectively benefit from this, maybe through less frustration, time saved, effort saved, better collaboration, right? So 3 pieces. What is it that I'm calling it, why I'm here, and how long is it going to take? Second piece is, I'm not just going to be yapping at you, but I want to hear, I'm absolutely curious about your perspective because I know that I probably don't have the full picture. And number 3, that I hope that we have collective value from it. That is the frame for the conversation. And it is not often in a conversation that you actually have time to sit at your desk and script how you want to open a conversation. But in this case, you do have a chance.
All right.
Because you know that you're going to have the conversation.
Yeah.
I beg people, sit down and actually just write out the basic ideas, because you've got one chance to make the noise that's going to exit your mouth when you start talking not be chaotic and sound frenetic, but sound calm and concise, right? So, and very often, if you just write your ideas out, I'm not saying write and memorize a script. I'm saying write your ideas out, because it crystallizes your thoughts and your words. Then, so that was a fat piece in terms of how you open the conversation. Then you get into, here is what I would like to tell you. And if you can, tell the person first what you appreciate about what they're doing right. It's what's working well. So over the past 4 months, I've really enjoyed working with you on this. I think we had a tremendous outcome of project XYZ. And I'm particularly impressed with your attention to detail in area ABC. I think what we can do better, what's working well first, and then what can we do better? And that is the negative part that you want to, the feedback that you want to get, or that you want to provide. And if you give feedback after you've cushioned it with what's going well, the other person's ears are far more open and they're far less inclined to feel defensive, because you've credited them where credit is due. Long answer. I hope that helps.
No, that's very helpful. A few things I wanted to double click on a bit is if you are in a corporate setting and you want to have this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in a virtual environment, that means a Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
Right. So you need to schedule something on the calendar.
Yes.
How do you advise doing that? Because when you schedule a meeting, best practices are to put in the agenda. What are you going to discuss? So do you recommend, because you talked about the opening, that's very critical.
Yeah.
Do you recommend having some of that in the meeting invite, or like how would you handle that situation? Because
I am absolutely thrilled that your intuition tells you that opener can work as a written piece. You're spot on. That opener is, I call it an I, we, you. It is, so why am I here? How long is it going to take? How are we going to discuss this with each other? I'm going to tell you what I'm complaining about. I want to hear what you're going to do, what you're going to answer me and what insight you're going to give me. And then why should you care about even having this meeting, the I, we, you? That works phenomenally well in a written piece. So I would write to you, dear Mukhtar, hope you're doing well. I would like to schedule a meeting with you that I believe is of common interest to us, and it pertains to some of the perceived lack of value in Project X that we've discussed before. Mm-hmm. I don't expect that this is going to take more than 15 to 20 minutes. I'm going to the we. What are we going to do together? I'll bring some practical examples of concerns that I have, and I would love to hear your perspective on it, because given your particular point of view and your role in the organization, surely you have a similar or different experience to mine. I'm hoping that this meeting will bring us closer together as collaborators and maybe remove some of the obstacles that we've been experiencing thus far. What do you think?
Interesting.
Right.
Okay.
So, these IWU openers, I use them in virtually every written invitation to a meeting with pretty much anyone. Even on LinkedIn, when I try to set up an information meeting and so forth as well.
I like that. Another framework, IWU. Lots of frameworks.
Why am I here? What do I hope we're going to do together, and how? And why will you feel after 15 minutes that was 15 minutes well spent?
That's good. I like that advice. It's just that from what I see in the corporate world, people would rather not spell things out, especially when it's going to be a difficult conversation. They'll, sometimes you don't even see anything. Let's just quick chat, and then you're left wondering what's going to happen. And then, in the meeting, they now sort of explain. So are you maybe recommending that it might be better to spell some of that out in the meeting agenda, or no?
Look, I want to be 100% realistic here, Mukhtar. When it comes to interpersonal dynamics, you can have every technique under the sun. And I can guarantee you that in 20% of cases, it's not going to work. Yeah. The other person is just going to be difficult to work with, etc., and you'll just take the hits as they come. But without a deliberate approach, without a well-considered approach, your failure rate is going to at least double or triple. Right? So these approaches help you to minimize your losses, your potential losses. And I believe in this very firmly, that in the feedback itself, no, sorry, let me start earlier. That I believe in this very firmly, that a structured meeting where we've put some time aside has better chance of survival. Because if I'm going to try and sneak negative feedback into a by the way kind of a comment, it's not going to land well.
Yeah, definitely.
If it's worth discussing, it's worth discussing properly. The reason why people try and sneak it in a by the way kind of a comment is they hope that the pain will be over soon.
Yeah.
And they hope that this will work. Like, I'm going to tell you something you don't like to hear in such a way that you don't notice it. Really? Yeah. Really? You know, so if it's worth discussing, structure the meeting. And then the second thing that I believe in very firmly is people are remarkably open to feedback. If you start with something that's legitimately worthy of credit, you know, first. Like, even if the other person is messing up everything, you can at least credit them with showing up or having spent a lot of time trying, right? You can tell them that and then say, here are the things that I think we need to focus on to correct or improve.
Quickly, before we move on, if you have to have a difficult conversation with a superior, do you change your approach? Is there anything, because, you know, the power dynamic now exists. You're not talking to a colleague or somebody below you in the org chart. What do you do differently?
In the cases where I have done that, and I've done that, and believe me, I'm not fond of conflict with superiors. Nobody is. It's super nervous territory. But in the cases where I've done this, in my opener, I would make a point of telling them that this feels awkward for me to do. And Mukhtar, there is something magical that occurs when you name the elephant in the room. We say to the person, you know, I want to talk to you about something that is not officially my place to talk to you about, but I think, and I feel awkward about it, but I think it matters so much that I chose to come and chat with you anyway. Are you open to that? Right? There is already a little bit of trust building there. You offer something about yourself. You say, this is something that bothers me. It's not officially my place to address it with you, and hence I feel awkward about it, but I think it matters so much to both of us that I'm gonna do it anyway. And I think the importance of setting the tone in the beginning of a meeting cannot be overestimated. And the tone here is one of sincerity and humility, but also courage. So I hope that gives you a sort of an idea.
Yeah, no, that's what I really like about what you said is that there's also the vulnerability factor, right? You know, and I'm a fan of Brené Brown, and, you know, she's done a lot of work on vulnerability. And when you do that, ironically, when you express vulnerability, it shows strength, right? People sort of, you know, with that expression of vulnerability, instead of you being seen as weak, the opposite actually tends to happen. So I do like that, you know, just naming the elephant in the room.
I just want to make a clarification there. Vulnerability does not have to be weakness, but you've got to manage this well. Don't tell the person, you know, I'm really nervous and I'm really scared to talk to you about this. That is not credibility. Tell the person, I know that it is not officially my role to give you this kind of feedback, and I feel awkward about doing it, but I care enough to do it anyway. You know, like, there is still an assertiveness there, because you feel you're coming across as somebody who's taking a grip on your on your circumstance, not just quivering your way into the conversation.
Yeah, no, definitely. Good point. Good point. How about the situation whereby someone takes credit for your ideas in meetings? How would you handle that? And I guess to be more specific, you share your idea in a meeting.
Yeah.
Someone else who's very charismatic, communicates with a lot of flair,
They
takes your
hijack
idea.
it.
Exactly. Takes your idea, whether consciously or unconsciously, but then people tend to now associate that idea with the person instead of you. And you notice this happens again and again. How would you handle this, or what would your advice be to somebody in this situation?
You're spelling out a really complex problem, because somebody who is that brazen is probably knowingly and deliberately quite dishonest, right? They are willing to look you in the eye as they appropriate your idea and present it like it's yours. Decision point one for me is to pick your battles. If you're going to go into this, is it going to be worth because the hair is going to fly? Is it going to be worth this battle? So first of all, you've got to decide whether it's worth your battle. If it's once off, maybe let it go. If it's a recurrent situation that materially impacts your career and your visibility in your organization, number one, never confront that person in front of everybody else, because your chances of losing publicly are enormous. You already said they're more charismatic, they're liked, they've got the team behind them, etc. If it is worth your while, go and have call a private meeting with them, get your IWU together. And my IWU would be something like this: Mukhtar, I want to talk to you about something that has to do with our mutual professional credibility. I'm going to try not to overtalk this, but I just want to alert you to this issue, maybe 15 minutes if you've got time. I'm going to give you my perspective. I'm in the we part. I'm going to give you my perspective. You tell me whether it's fair or not, but I would like to also hear your perspective, because I know that you're extremely experienced. I'm not just here to talk at you, but rather to talk with you. And I'm hoping that you and I can maybe collaborate a little bit more tightly going forward. And then I would say to him, look, Mukhtar, in the what's working well, what can we do better feedback part, I would say to you that you have a ton of experience, and you also, by virtue of your experience, have a ton of credibility with the audience. I noticed, though, that in the last meeting, the very proposal that I put together and showed to you before the meeting, you presented it as if it were your sole idea. Was that your intent? Let them talk, right? Again, these are those 80-20 solutions. I'm not telling, you know, if Mukhtar is a highly conniving character, he will probably try and run circles around me. But I think it's very powerful to describe somebody's behavior to them, like holding up a mirror to them and saying, comment on that, please. At least they will know that they've been called out. At least they will tread a little bit more carefully the next time. You might not find a 100% satisfying solution in that meeting, but at least the topic has been broached.
Yeah. No, I like that. And it takes speaking about courage, it takes some courage to do that sometimes,
Certainly.
especially when that person is as well liked and has a lot of political capital. But
Yeah.
I like the fact that you call it out instead of you sulking in private. You call it out like I really see what's happening, and I mean maybe things might get better, maybe not, but at least you've done, you've taken steps.
Yeah, I've seen people leave jobs because colleagues don't want them to share the spotlight. Really, I've seen that. And that to me is a tragedy, because you've worked so hard to get into that job, right? Into that role. It was your dream job. All your hopes were hinged on it. And now you've got this person. My fundamental belief is that you teach people how to treat you at every turn. And if you don't call it out, they will know that they can keep on doing it.
Definitely.
With full freedom.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's definitely helpful, Marcus. I feel like I can keep on going. So maybe we just do one more question.
Sure.
And so what would your advice be for non-natives, right? People, for example, we both live in Canada, so we have lots of people that emigrate to Canada, or you have people, that are expatriates. Maybe they've gone overseas to work.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to somebody in that situation? They come into this country that they were not born in, but they want to be able to rise to the highest levels of corporate, right? So maybe they don't speak the local language. Maybe they speak with an accent, or maybe they do speak the local language, but they look very different, right? So what would your advice be to somebody in that situation who wants to still be able to rise to the highest levels?
So you're talking about visible and audible by minorities.
Yes,
in a way.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I would use you as an example. Clearly, you have an accent. You'll never shake that accent. But you're a pleasure to listen to. Why? Because with that accent, you are crystal clear. Number one, you pace yourself when you speak, and you speak every word with quite remarkable deliberateness, right? So you speak like somebody who feels that what they have to say is important enough to enunciate the words one by one. It's that whole idea of finish your words, separate them a little bit, and govern your pace. Stop number one in the train ride towards credibility is pace, deliberate enunciation, and deliberate speech. And in that case, your accent becomes as charming as anything. It's actually lovely to listen to, although it is different.
Interesting.
It is not to be underestimated how clarity impacts credibility. The second part is ordering your thoughts, right? Those unpacking techniques that I spoke about. The third part, in influencing how other people view you and thus treat you as a consequence, is to what extent you engage them when you're interacting with them. And I feel that that is an element that many of us struggle with, including myself. When I'm nervous, say you're a big shot in a company and I want to impress you, the likelihood that I'm going to be yapping at 100 miles a minute is very high. Why? Because I falsely or mistakenly believe that it is up to me to carry the entire weight of the conversation on my shoulders. What I ought to do is shut up a little bit and ask you questions that can get you talking. You know, things that where I solicit your perspective, where I show deliberate and authentic curiosity about your stance on things, your perspective on things. The more I get you talking, the more I will get you to like me. Because people can't resist that. If I show you that you're worth listening to, you like me automatically. So clarity, crisp and conciseness, and involvement of the other, and showing tangible curiosity about their perspectives. And we are now in the whole idea of not just using language, but also building rapport with other people faster. Yeah. And for me, that creates visibility, and it changes how people view you.
Yeah. No, that's really nice. So clarity, structure, and then engaging the other person, inviting them, inviting them to be a part of the conversation and all of that. So
I mean, we can talk for an hour about engagement, you know, getting the other person to talk, but we'll probably suffice with this. But it is about asking really good questions about things that you're actually interested in hearing. Sometimes people ask questions just for the sake of asking a question because they heard somewhere that somebody said you should ask questions. No, it should be about things that tickle your curiosity, right?
Yeah,
because you'll listen differently then too.
Definitely. I could keep on going, but like I have so much to talk about, but I think we have to come to a close here. Markus, if people wanna get in touch with you, how can they do that? If they want to follow your work or if they want to get in touch with you?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. LinkedIn, number one. I mean, LinkedIn is constantly buzzing on my alerts, and I respond to all LinkedIn messages. So just my name as it is spelled, Markus with a K, Van, Aardt. I think there is another guy with that name, believe it or not, somewhere in South Africa, but you'll see on the picture, he doesn't look anything like me, and he's also an engineer, right? So you can find me on LinkedIn. Also, in your YouTube channel, you can just type in @Markus with a K Van Aardt, and you'll see my videos there. So either way, people can get a hold of me. If they're interested, and of course I'd be hugely gratified if they wanted to.
Yeah, and I would link to to your LinkedIn profile and the YouTube channel on this video. Markus, this was very great. This was a pleasure. I wish we had more time. I would have really loved to delve into some more topics. But thank you for coming to do this interview. I appreciate your time, Markus.
Maybe one day I'll ask you if I can interview you, because the journey that you've taken since I met you up till now clearly has been remarkable. And I'm always curious, you know, what were the obstacles that people faced, what they looked like back then, and what do they look like now in retrospect, right? And what occurred in the meantime. So if you're open to it, maybe one day.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I'll be very open to.
Thank you.
I would love to do another interview with you, Markus.
I really appreciate it, Mukhtar. Thank you so much for this opportunity.